Dr. Richard C. Miller, you have 3 master's degrees. You've gone through various ranks from Princeton University. You've been to Yale. You've been to various colleges, Fuller. You were theologically minded. You were a very devout Christian. So you know what New Testament scholarship is. James Charlesworth, you've really dug deep into the various schools, from the Christian Reformed, N.T. Wright types, to the maybe more serious James Charlesworth types, to the Allisons, Dale Allison Jr.'s, and all the way now to what you would say is the peak of classicist, non-faith requirement type, just research and the real historical, like, don't have limitations on what you can draw, etc. What is the problem?
The problem. Well, let me talk about some of the manifestations of the problem. Maybe we can get back into the problem by talking about that. Well, let me first start by saying I am not a member of SBL at this point. I don't believe it is a valid discursive framework for this field. I think it's very important to pick your discursive partners very carefully, those that share the same kind of foundation in terms of what you're trying to do in your project. And so I'm very much an evidence-based, evidence-grounded. I try to, as much scientific rigor as I possibly can. I use that term in a broader sense than the hard sciences, but I try to put as much rigor as possible around my work, and to not let other frameworks, religious intents, modern feuds about what this means, or any other particular conflict of interest get involved in any way, or even to worry about what that may mean for anyone else. I feel like when I go to SBL, that is not the project. When people are showing up, half of them with name badges from schools where they're required to sign doctrinal statements and confessional creeds, many of them would get fired. In fact, I would say most of them, if they took my book seriously and to the extent of even agreeing with me, that would be hazardous for many, many, many careers. And so, to me, that is not a discourse.
So already 50%, just no real numbers here, but a huge percentage of what is considered serious academics. These aren't even evangelicals. These aren't even fundamentalists. These are like what are considered real academics. Like 50% of them, right? They have to sign a statement of faith. I'm not going to name a person. I interviewed a person, and I'll just say that. I don't want to do this because I care about people who I was interviewing. They said some things about Jesus being wrong, about apocalypticism, okay? They've asked me to please remove the interviews from YouTube because they're trying to get a job, and the job was going to be at a church for them to teach.
Yeah.
I had no problem doing that for them because I care about people more than I care about an argument on YouTube, or like I'm more of a people person than people realize about the whole, you just want to debunk Christianity. Look, I got friends who are Christians, but they did not want to answer certain things on camera that they were willing to tell me in private. Yeah. And that alone made me even go like, what? And I know we're sounding a bit conspiratorial here, but I want to start off, this isn't a conspiracy when you have like the Mike Laconas, for example, who literally take that Matthew 28 zombie apocalypse as allegory because he can't accept that as historical for good reason. Yeah. And he gets fired from his evangelical college. But SBL typically has people who aren't in these evangelicals, some might be, but most, from what I understand, are some prestigious schools like Princeton,
yeah,
Yale, maybe at Yale, some spots. I don't know. What's the problem with that, Dr. Miller? Can't they just sign their confession and get to the truth?
Well, so let me give an analogy. You're going to have a heart surgery. Now, how much witch doctorism do you want involved in that procedure?
None.
Right. Now, when I put that forward, you want the kind of rigor that you would get, like, say, at Stanford Medical Center or UCLA, real people doing real scientific work that are not interested in some kind of hocus pocus idea about health or, the spirits being involved or any of these kinds of things. That's what I'm after. I'm a Carl Sagan kind of person. I want to know. I don't want to believe. I want to know. So that's what I'm after. That's not the discourse that I saw all the way even up to the top, even at Yale Divinity School. And I don't mean to criticize those places. I know that they are well-intended people, and I learned a tremendous amount from any number of them all along my journey. But at this point, that discourse is not helpful to me. It's in the way. In fact, it's even offensive. And so anybody that's operating from trying to answer historical questions when they, having the answers before they may even know the questions, that's not a scientific approach. We have to call that something else. I don't even know that's madness in my view. And that's really what's going on. And people are entering this discussion already determining what the conclusion needs to be before they even begin. And then going back and trying to marshal the evidence to get there. And to me, that is the Dark Ages. I have no tolerance for that. And so I love the people, but I have no respect for that approach. And so you don't see me arguing a whole lot with anyone in my book. I try to treat everyone with respect and dignity. I'm not interested in feuds and, shoot out at the OK Corral or anything like that. I'm interested in the human plight. And I almost had to write this for an audience that doesn't exist now, where the discourse isn't broken, maybe in 100 years or something like that. And so that's kind of so when you talk about mainstream scholarship, you're talking about SBL's big tent. Okay, and that means let's invite everyone. Now, already you've just exited the academic world, at least in terms of what secular academia means. Let's invite everyone and have them equally able to give presentations on this and that topic. And it ends up becoming a negotiation, a cultural negotiation in our time between faith and these historical methods that we're trying to apply to the Bible. The midpoint between that, if you were to create a bell curve of where all of the scholars might distribute across, on the spectrum between literalism between historical rigor and more of a faith approach. The midpoint between those two is not the answer. And so I find that oftentimes you go online or you see in articles things like, mainstream scholars say this and that. That doesn't prove a thing. Mainstream scholars is midpoint between witch doctorism and actual medical science. These are people that are in orbit around faith communities, living in a world that is still under the spell, Western world, still under the spell of these sacred texts, with students giving them student reviews based upon their faith. Why are they even taking the class? Because they think it's an easy A, because they were raised in the Christian tradition. And so when they show up to the class, they judge the teacher based upon how comfortable they were with what they got. And so professors are worried about their own student reviews. They're worried about faith-based academic boards, a publication. How do you publish something like what I've published to a society that is still very much under the spell of these texts, is not interested in hearing them be what they find dear and comforting deconstructed? I understand why they find it dear. I sympathize even with it. But when I get to my academic work, I need to let go of all that and get rigorous and honest in its most pure form. And I want to be in conversation with others that are like-minded in that way. Not toward atheism necessarily, but toward answering these questions without the distraction, the hindrance, the arbitrary lines. Like, for instance, what is biblical Greek? What is that? I never heard of such a thing. Do you think that there was a distinctive use of Greek that only the New Testament authors were privy to?
That sounds like a category people do use, as if I have heard it said that, these Jewish Greek-speaking, Greek-writing people, they were using things, but they didn't use them the same way. Like Hades in Revelation, that's not Hades, the Greek, Hades. That's a totally new kind of idea they're using in the Greek world to describe the Jewish concept of Sheol or something. You know what I mean? And I'm sure there's some fusion that does take place when the Jews obviously are Hellenized, but
certainly, yeah. And you could say Sheol. Why did they even use the word Hades? Why did they translate it that way?
Right.
Well, it's because that's their analog, and so they're moving that direction. There's a whole world of stuff we can unpack with that particular puzzle itself. But, I think that we need to get honest about where people are starting from, what their project is. If your project is to influence modern faith and constructs of theology, I don't want to talk. That's not the person I'm trying to be in conversation with in terms of my own work.
So if I can press you back, I want to press devil's advocate here, so that I can get you to maybe even nuance some of this so people understand. Yeah, but John J. Collins, Paula Fredrickson, as far as I'm aware, she's not a Christian. I could probably name a couple people that you would probably say find ways to speak at SBL. Collins' wife, Yarbrough, isn't it?
Adele Yarbrough Collins, yeah.
Like I can list some of these people who I would say aren't Christians, but they're finding themselves sometimes at SBL speaking, or they speak some of these places. What would you say if I was trying to bring back some pushback against what you said?
Oh yeah, no, I'm I'll let them speak for themselves to some extent here. I mean, maybe you'll have them on the show and they could talk about that. But from my perspective, I have a deep respect. I took classes with Adele Yarbrough Collins and John J. Collins and all those, and they are Catholic from what I understood in the loosest possible sense, probably. They do affiliate with that tradition in some way. But the students, you had priests in there and pastors and all sorts of people in there that have they're going on to be shaman in our society. They're not going on to be historians and secularists. They're going on to shape modern religious mythological constructs in the minds of people that are practitioners. And so let's not kid ourselves what's going on there. That's a divinity school. That's what's going on there. This isn't the place. Now, they're setting up shop there and they're finding their ability to have careers there, and I respect that, but that's not what I'm trying to do. And so I'm not interested in trying to help pastors become more effective in being pastors or anything like that. I have no interest in that project at all. I'm interested, just like the classicist, in understanding what the earliest Christians thought and what they were trying to do and how it would have registered in the ancient world, and then how now, as a humanist, this should best be processed in terms of our modern scholarly investigation of that. And so
this is kind of one of the things that emphasizing is what they're teaching. You went through this for well over two decades of like going to school, doing this stuff as a Christian, doing this stuff as a Christian scholar, and getting to the end of the road, and you're looking back and you're seeing the journey you took, and you went, like, I could have cut out all of this and been right here toward the conclusion if I'd have started researching this from the beginning. Now, there's some stuff, I'm sure you owe a debt to the idea that you've learned some stuff along the way that was valuable in your research of knowing what you know today. But would you say that you could have saved yourself a lot of time and money if you would have just gone to this? Is that what you're suggesting?
Well, I mean, let's start with had I been reared in this society to have those critical faculties from the jump, I wouldn't have gone on this big journey into delusion and trying to find my way through the labyrinth out of it at the other end. I would have been, just like we understand Roman history and don't lose a lot of sleep understanding it, I would have had more or less the same ability to reflect on what the early Christians were doing and the early Buddhists. It would have been just another garden variety secular topic of investigation for my own humanistic kind of enrichment, had I done that. And I can't tell you how many books I've thrown away or given away that are no longer useful to me because they are steeped in theological. They're theological projects. There's all of, even the most distant participants in our discourse often are still, even unbeknownst to them, unwittingly often, still in orbit around that gravitational center of faith. It's such a powerful influence. No one wants to, there's too much at stake there. And so Pascal's wager, maybe we can get into that in another video, but that's a major part of this that needs to come into play that doesn't exist for other subject matters. And so What's at stake for society, culture, their own eternal destiny, their own sense of comfort and construction of their own identity? There's too much self-interest in this field. And in my view, that disqualifies nearly all of the participants. And so I know that's going to sound crazy, but I think that's honest.
So this leads to the final question in the scholarship issue. We pick up classics. I go to Yale. I want to go in the classics department. Just suppose I'm already an undergraduate. I'm already on my way up there. I'm going to do a PhD program. I'm going to be a classicist. I go into this and I'm going to pick up the study of ancient Greek, Roman mythology. There is no nexus surrounding some center gravitational pull of like Hercules really with him or without him, you never know, you can go to hell. But I want to know what the truth is about Greek and Roman society, the ins, the outs. There's really nothing about Hercules, Asclepius, anything Greek and Roman that is untouchable. There is no limit to what I could explore pertaining to classics. And so it's a fair, safe, go in. You don't have to deal with someone going, hey, Hercules really did jump on that pyre and actually did go to heaven. Nobody's arguing that in the classics department.
Right.
And so what would you recommend, since we talked about the problems and how we really cannot sit here and throw around consensus or like, I have 10 scholars who say you're wrong, because you could do that with evangelicals. And this happens in the discourse online with people I deal with. They list off, Craig Evans said, and N.T. Wright said, and William Lane Craig said, and so did the Lydia and Tim McGrew and all these Christian apologists. Look at all these scholars who said this. And then the other guys come in and go, well, Bart Ehrman said, and John J. Cullen said, and so-and-so said. And actually, I do think that they're closer to the reality of what's going on from that side. But what do we do? How do we solve this problem? Do we create a new department and focus on, this is non-faith, secular humanist studies on New Testament studies, and we're going to do it new and different, and we're not going to be in the communication with... Yeah. What do you think?
Well, I've identifying this problem. First off, I want to say, lots of times I'm perceived as on the radical far end of the discussion. Like, in fact, I even read, there was a blog or something that came out of a few days ago where it was like Miller and like a few of were kind of like pushed off to the margins, like just these wild, like desperados. Even Carrier, and he's, I understand, but he, the problem is that, yeah, we look radical to this discourse, what I would call the Big Ten or circus of nonsense. But if you get to the actual discourse, the human discourse, the secular academic discourse, we're smack dab in the middle. We are mainstream. Those guys don't want to go to SBL. They think it's a circus. And so they don't want to have any part of it. That maelstrom of belief and all of the loaded topics and all the charged kind of politics that's going on with that. And so I even brought up to Cusco, the former president of SBL, when I was more involved there, before I got completely frustrated. I said, why don't we have a checkbox at least, so that when people start sessions at the conference, they could indicate this is a purely secular session, or this is a purely evidence-driven humanistic kind of platform. Please do not, we do not invite, discussion that's aimed at theological constructs or anything that's motivated by faith whatsoever. Even if you were to announce that, people would show up and still import all of their beliefs and so on.
Of course.
So yeah, it's almost impossible basically to get out of that. And so I just decided that my discourse is going to be outside of that. I take my hat off to those people that are still out there. A lot of them are orbiting so far out there, like the John J. Collinses and stuff, that they're still extremely informative to me and helpful, and I respect them.
But they also, there's a place they've kept their career. Like, you're suggesting that there would be no way to probably keep that career and do what you were doing and write what you're writing and actually teach what you're teaching here and keep a career at somewhere like Yale Divinity or Princeton Theological or any of these places. You would probably lose your job without a doubt.
Well, I haven't heard the phone call yet, and I don't know. I mean, I understand that maybe they see me as not qualified or something like that. I don't know what they're very selective and they only have openings here and there, and I'm probably not on their short list at this point. But
Right.
but just this kind of stuff, I mean, that's what they'd have to weigh through. Do we want somebody like this that's doing work that's so upsetting to so many people in a context where we're training ministers and clergy and clerics and this kind of thing? Is that where he belongs?
Yeah, I'd love to see scholarship, the institutions incorporate people like you to give people of faith at least knowing, like they do. They teach them things about contradictions. They teach them all this stuff. They don't preach that stuff. But it'd be at least in the right direction of letting them hear that discourse. Instead, you're not. So the final thing about that, I'd like to say, is you're suggesting that the people who think SBL and other societies like that are circuses, to use your words, is a big clown show of like circus. I have to emphasize that. So, is that these are probably classicists who see they don't want to wade into the storm of New Testament drama that goes on, even though they might see it actually categorized in that vein. It is a classicist thing. It is a Greek thing. It is a Hellenized thing that would fit right into classics and work perfectly. But because so much drama is attached to it, because we have a living religion still, whereas like there might be people out there who worship Zeus in the world or think Hercules is true. There is no systematic power. They have no power. There's so little in the world, so it's okay. Like
they're irrelevant to the discussion. Yeah, that's the opposite of the case here. Yeah.
So you're saying that's why the living religion has that much power, strength, and struggle that they don't even want to engage in dialogue because of this.
Yeah. I think that, and my doctoral work was transdisciplinary. I took a lot of classics courses. I had a lot of classics, professors over me, training me from various places, UCLA, Yale, the Claremont colleges, and other places. And so I was in those contexts, and I got to hear what the backroom discussions were at a lot of these places. And no, they don't want to touch this with a 10-foot pole. They're not interested. Even the people that I got on my dissertation committee, it was a little bit of a struggle to get them to be part of it. And I thank them because their careers are now tied to my work in some way that they might not have signed on for that. They don't want to be part of being pulled into some apologetic debate with people throwing, mud and poop at them. And they've got dignified careers all in their own right, and they didn't sign up for that. And so it definitely spoils and ruins, and I think utterly destroys the discourse. The Greek lexicon, for instance, there's no such thing as a New Testament lexicon. It doesn't exist. There's no such thing as the New Testament in its own right. That's a construct that we're foisting upon it. This is just earliest Christian writing.
Okay, so last thing, I'm sorry I'm adding this on, but I think this is important what you're saying here. In your private discussions with classicists that come from the Greek, Roman research that they know some New Testament stuff.
Yeah.
Are they looking at this like you're looking at this? Do they see this stuff? I mean, I'm sure there's some people who have faith in classicist departments, but the ones that you're saying are secular, that are like obviously not engaging at all, are they looking at this going, this is another legend? Like this is obviously another one of them.
Yeah. There's mixed. I've seen that. I've seen a lot of that actually, backroom discussions. I've shared my research at places, some of the list I gave you, with top people, and they'll look at it and say, yeah, you're correct. In fact, Veronica Grimm, who initially got me on my way to reading Romulus, I think in the back of her mind, later on talking to her, she said, I selected that text sort of at the beginning because I knew you were coming from the Divinity school. And I thought you should maybe take a peek at that. And so they're quietly doing that it's kind of like I'm a proxy in that way. But, so those are backroom kind of ivory tower academic discussions that the world, the larger world is not privy to. There are others too that were trained because they're also trained to have that dividing line. And so some of them, their Christianity course that they take basically says, no, nothing to see here, move on. This is all Jewish. And so they're trained also to draw that line in the sand. And a lot of that line starts to, get disrupted as they begin actually doing their real work over time. And that's where I find these interesting and very honest discussions. Yeah.
So you, Robin Faith Walsh, Dennis MacDonald, Litwa would be in this category at least. And you, of course, we'll get later into some of the criticisms of the recent work, how the Gospels became history and stuff. But these are people that we can say are at least engaging as fair and as close to what the reality is with this literature in a Greek, Roman, Jewish world.
Yeah. Now, that doesn't mean we're all right, but at least we're on the golf course.
Got it.
We're on the golf course. We're hitting the ball. Now, what's bizarre to me is oftentimes when you go to actual normal, what we would call mainstream New Testament studies, they think they're just on the putting green perfecting their discussion. This group that you're talking about, those that are doing true transdisciplinary work that's untethered to theology from a classicist, hybridic kind of perspective, we don't even think they're on the golf course. And so you might quibble about where we're at on this and that. I actually think I'm pretty damn close to right on this, about 99%. My core arguments, I'm 1,000% confident in. Some of my ancillary arguments are up for discussion, and that's part of the discourse. This is like a science. We're going to grow and learn. No one's going to have the final answer on it, but we're going to advance in our understanding. And so that's where I think it's at. And I believe I've made a strong contribution in that way. But yeah, I think that basically you've got a group of people that are doing rigorous work in that space, trying to truly contextualize these writings within the world that they grew up, within the world that they found their initial meaning. And so I don't find that going on at a lot of the divinity schools and seminaries in this country.
Thank you.
I hope you liked my dad, Richard Miller, in this interview. Remember to like and subscribe. And never forget, we are MythVision.